All right, good afternoon. Now I'd like to bring the regular afternoon meeting of Township Council to order. And the first item is the adoption and receipt of the agenda items. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Arneson, second by Councillor Long. All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Move on to adoption of minutes of the regular afternoon council meeting of April the 15th. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Kuntz, second. Councillor Woodward. And are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Now we need a motion to resolve into special closed meeting for the items on the agenda. Are there any on-table items? Any on-table? Okay. Move and second. Moved by Councillor Long. Seconder? Second by Councillor Arneson.
Double check.
Oh. Does anybody want to add anything to this special closed meeting? Okay. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We now move into special closed.
I was thinking of only.
Now I'm going to reconvene the regular meeting of the Township Council. And the first, or the next item on the agenda is presentations. We have a cemetery operations review, presentation by staff. Mr. Buckner.
Good afternoon, Worship, fellow councillors. The Township undertook a process to retain Eric Lees and Associates to do a review of our cemetery operations plan, and they're here today to do a presentation based on that plan, and then I'll be following up at the end with the next steps. So the desired outcome of this meeting is for Council to receive the Township of Langley Cemetery Operation Review, and for Council to authorize staff to bring forward necessary budgets and requests for the consideration, if so desired by Council. I'd like to introduce our consultants. Eric Lees and Eileen Finn are here, and Eric is going to take over the presentation from now.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's my pleasure to talk about cemeteries for the next hour and a half or 2 hours. Is that okay? I was at a conference this week actually, and no one introduced me, and I just launched into the presentation on cemeteries, and afterwards someone came up and said, "How did you get into this anyway?" I'm into it now after 21 years. Actually, I was 20 years on TAB side of the table in parks management and cemeteries when I started the practice in 98, and now I have surrounded myself with people who are much smarter and more brilliant than I am by a long stretch, including Eileen, who's one of the prime authors of this report. Others who are listed here have taken an active hand in it as well. But this is what we do. Primarily, we do a lot of other parks and trails work also, but cemeteries is easily 50% of our work across Canada. A little bit on the project background, and then what I'll do is to spend the better part of the time available talking about the three concept plans. There'd be an existing plan for each cemetery, and then the concept plan. Close with a discussion, Mr. Mayor, around the inventory and some of the key operations and pricing recommendations, and then, as Tab said, he'll entertain questions. Well, we all three of us will, but he'll talk about the next steps. So we've been looking. We've had the pleasure of working with the township over the years on cemeteries from a system-wide standpoint, and then a year or so ago. Tab asked us to look at the operations review. We wanted to make sure that we were guiding the management decisions or providing a sufficient basis to guide management decisions, identify various strategies to enhance the cemetery service delivery to the community, not only through the physical improvements and the product and service improvements, but ultimately bring the cemetery closer to a break even, which is really one of the key recommendations that follow. And really to make sure that council and through council to staff have a clear sense of future cemetery development. So I'll go through each of the three cemeteries, starting with Fort Langley. This is an existing, shows the existing condition. I'm sure you've all been there one time or another, specifically for the Remembrance Day ceremony. One of from what Tab was just telling me, one of the most heavily attended community events in the township occurs in that southeast corner. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about the existing conditions, assuming that you know these sites, but it is clearly one of the most significant cultural landscapes in the community, given the heritage of Langley and what's happened there at the fort over the years. So this slide, as will be the case with the other two, shows the recommended path forward with some of the key highlighted areas. So if you scan to the left-hand side of these images, you'll see a couple red dotted areas that include the recommended phasing for in. That's all right. It sounds interesting, actually. The areas outlined with the red dots are the expansion areas, because you're rapidly running out of space at Fort Langley. So there is room here for new burial areas for both cremated remains, interment options, as well as for traditional burial. Improving the way in which the bulk materials are handled and stored in the new operations yard, and some other physical infrastructure improvements that will see the cemetery serve this part of the community for a number of years to come. So this work is well underway. We'll talk more about the implementation towards the end. Murrayville, of course, is another historic landscape in the community. Has had some improvements over the years, most specifically columbaria. There's not a lot of significant room to expand here, right up against a ravine edge and a wooded area. So we can't really go in that direction, and I think the next slide pretty much shows the relatively conservative suite of recommendations that we're bringing forward. We want to once again regularize the bulk storage and materials, improve the capacity for interment of cremated remains down this east side, more or less sort of painting our way out of the corner as interment options are laid in here and on an infill basis. So we're able to actually, with interment of cremated remains, get quite a few accommodate quite a few families and their desire for interment and memorialization within these relatively narrow footprints. We are suggesting that the old historic entry into Murrayville to the far north be opened up just for walkways into the adjacent neighborhood area, which will improve access to the site for residents and neighbors, and of course that in itself helps with septet and vandalism, getting good people in there doing good things. And of course, Langley Lawn is where most of your capacity resides, Mr. Mayor. There's significant lands remaining to the west. The big moves here, which we'll show in the next slide, are kind of on the south and then on the north side. It's an active cemetery with a pretty good mix of cremated remains and traditional interment options, but we think that there could be some there should be some improvements there, and the main ones involve the relocation of the workyard and bulk materials area from what you see on the lower south side of the image to the north side. And in that way, we're able to do a couple things, service the area properly, but most importantly, free up that whole southern section, or a good part of the southern section, for what we refer to as green burial, which I can explain to you a bit more later what that would entail. But that would... we think would be a much better way to handle the bulk materials and to optimize that southern edge. And then the majority of the new interment would be to the east. Again, the zone demarcated by the red line, ultimately surrounding a decorative fountain that kind of lies on axis with the center line of the cemetery as exists. So these would be the new interment areas for traditional in-ground burial. There's already some that have occurred in this zone. That's why this path does not extend through, because we already got burials in here. We also think that it would be timely to put some resources into the customer service building here, so that families are able to be served at the cemetery in the same way that they would be actually at Fort Langley, where we're making similar recommendations for the existing building that's there. What else can I tell you? I'm hitting the high points in the interest of time, Mr. Mayor, so I think we can come back to these if you like. So the good news is that unlike many communities in British Columbia, you've got pretty good capacity for the next 25 or 30 years, depending on the trend towards cremation and green burial. You're still in that 5-year range for casket lots, which may sound like a good bit of time, but it takes time to get approvals in Victoria. We all know how long that can take at times. So we wouldn't advise. We would advise that you proceed with the recommendation to get the new casket lots up and running. You've got pretty good capacity for cremation lots now, but your number of columbarium niches are getting down. So you need to ensure that staff are sufficiently directed and resourced in order to maintain the inventory you have. But the good news is that you've got the geography to continue to serve the community for a couple more decades. And after that, it's anyone's guess as to how we'll be interring, whether we will continue to inter in perpetuity or we might go to a fixed term lease of some kind by then. But that's probably after most of us are involved or have our hands on the helm. So key recommendations are to get those green burial options into the cemetery inventory. This is a growing area of interest, especially for a community such as yours that's so closely tied to the land. We think that the uptake would be strong there. And to, as you've been hearing me say, institute a series of a variety of options for the interment of cremated remains, because in this community you're a little bit below average, but still fully 75 to 80% of people are choosing cremation, and that's where most of that's the method that most people are using for disposition. And so we need to find a way for those cremated remains to come to the cemetery along with the appropriate memorialization, and sometimes even without memorialization for those that choose to maybe leave the cremated remains sitting on the mantelpiece or wherever at home they may be, or potentially even spread on unsanctioned ground elsewhere in the community. The idea of memorialization without interment, where the community narrative is still told even though there isn't burial there, is something that we think should be considered of high value. We also think that it's opportune to embark upon a strategy to see the cemetery move towards full cost recovery. It's unlike almost any other municipal business unit in that there is almost sufficient revenue to recover all costs. With a little bit of tweaking around the fees and charges, you could get to that, plus a variety of other mechanisms. But that was outside the remit that we were given for this project. But we consequently think that strategy should be incorporated into a work plan in the near term. So shall I just jump right into first steps, or do you want to tab?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think I kind of summarized it in the description of this is the far western side of the cemetery. The park is just over here. We think that in fact, this area has already been laid out by your own internal survey group. So we've got some of the capacity for both cremated remains and traditional burial. That's already underway. We've got a new columbaria that will go down and be within the same neighborhood as the existing columbaria. That's happening in July, right? Thereabouts. and the necessary approvals with the province. That application has already been made, so that once the ground is laid out and suitably pinned and identified, that with some relatively minor landscape improvements, you'll be able to start using that area for burial purposes. Anything further we want to bring to council's attention from next steps?
I guess just to highlight too, from a overall perspective of our cemetery inventory, which is the 3 cemeteries, we're okay in inventory. But where we do have challenges that lie is Murrayville Cemetery, and its current size is pretty well at capacity. And Fort Langley, and currently it's almost at its capacity as well. So the next thing that Mr. Lee's brought up is we've been focusing on the redevelopment of the unused area at Fort Langley, because our casket inventory is very, very low there, and don't want to be in a position where we're having to turn residents away that would like to inter their loved ones there. So that's why we've kind of been moving ahead with the Fort Langley proposal that is included in the package a little quicker than we anticipated, just because of that inventory. So,
Thank you. Thank you. There is a list of interested councillors who have questions. I've got a couple. You mentioned on the next steps just Fort Langley, but there's other, like Murrayville and the other one needs some work. So just Fort Langley, just want to get a feeling for the motion that's coming up next in the reports to council. And so are you looking for something for Fort Langley now, or is that part of the next budget process?
that would be next for the next
Okay.
budget process, would be continuation development of Fort Langley. We're trying to do what we can within our operation funds to get it where we can actually start potentially, if approved, to start opening up part of phase one for casket burials, just because we have very limited option in the existing cemetery. And then the next would be part of the capital budget, which would be doing the steps to offer green burials at Langley Lawn Cemetery. But before we can do that, it's kind of a two-step process, which is relocating the current operations or the current storage yard that's at Langley Lawn Cemetery, moving it north into the cemetery, which then frees up the space that it resides in right now. The difficulties we have with the current operation or current storage yard, there's no services to it. So it's just buried, no water, no hydro, no sewer. So the reason we were looking at relocating it north is to hopefully take advantage and get permission from the city to hook up to their services.
Thank you. So that brings me to my next question. Is the city of Langley, I get the occasional email from a resident in the city, because I understand they don't have any facilities for burial, and they look to the township. How does that fit in? Like, do they contribute to this, or are they using ours? Or are they going to Surrey, or what do they use it?
Yeah, sorry, Worship. When we changed when council adopted the new bylaws in 2016, it was very restrictive in there that only township residents or former residents or family members are allowed to inter a casket remains in our cemetery. So basically excluded all non-residents. Cremated remains, we don't have that differentiation, so we are not that restrictive with cremated remains. So in the case now, since 2016, Langley residents cannot purchase a casket interment with any of our cemeteries, nor can any other person from Abbotsford or Surrey or of that nature.
And it's mentioned unsanctioned spreading of, was that the term? Spreading of ashes. What are the rules or laws around that? Because people do that. They go out to certain areas and they spread ashes. Is there any concern with that? Is that something that needs to be addressed in our bylaws?
I just know it's illegal.
Yeah. So illegal at which level? Provincial,
Well,
federal?
it's a great question, Mr. Mayor. It's a bit of a hobby horse for me, so I'll try to keep it to that one to under an hour as well. But basically, it comes when you're spreading cremated remains on land that you don't own, you're littering. Number one, if you're spreading them in a fish-bearing stream, then you're adding sediment to the stream. That's not good. Of course, most people don't think that a couple pounds of cremated remains is really going to do much damage, but keep this in mind. Cremated remains are toxic to plants. They're very salty, and they're full of calcium, which changes the pH of the soil. And given that most of our ecosystems are acid-based, fir and cedar ecosystems, that's not good. So you need to be very careful. You can't grow stuff directly in cremated remains. Now, having said that, 80% of cremations do not return to a cemetery. On a good day, on a good year, only about 20% of cremations that occur in a community will end up on sanctioned ground, whether that's a church or a churchyard or a municipal or a private cemetery. So that's, of course, where I think this community has a huge amount of growth potential is in offering cremated remains interment options so that those remains can be interred respectfully and that the story of those families can be told because we're missing a whole generation of community narrative when we don't memorialize.
Okay. Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Richter.
Okay. I'm just wanting to go back to your proposed. Now, you said we've got good capacity for the next 25 to 30 years, and we need to have a bigger proposed inventory for greater than 30 years. So my question is, because I didn't quite understand, do we need to develop this proposed inventory on the existing 3 sites, or do we need to start looking now for a 4th cemetery site?
Go ahead. It's twofold, Councillor Richter, that we need to expand within our current system, and then we need to look for the future for additional lands for the 25, 30 years out as well, and look at the potential if land comes available near a cemetery, because ideally would be purchasing lands to the adjacent of a cemetery so you can expand it. So I know that our property services department is keeping an eye out for that if those potentials arise, and then considering that option going forward.
Okay. And with regards to the Fort Langley site, should we be thinking about moving the Fort Langley pool?
That I can't answer on the where the Fort Langley pool will lie in the next couple of years. Just so for reference for council is that actually the parking lot for Fort Langley Community Park actually relies on cemetery property. Probably back then it wasn't much consideration that the cemetery would eventually get full over a number of years, and it was just a good place for the parking lot to be built. So in phase 3 of the expansion in Fort Langley is proposed, phase 3 would be taking the northern portion of the parking lot over again, or back over, and turning it into a cemetery.
But then, like if we took the pool out as well at that time, that would give double the space, right? The
pool is to the very west of the parking lot, and we weren't envisioning taking that section of the pool and converting the pool into cemetery use. We were just leaving it as part of park usage for potentially whatever is decided upon to replace the pool with.
Okay, and you mentioned that since 2016, city residents or any residents outside of township can't purchase burial plots anymore, but they can have their ashes interred. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so only resident, former resident, or family members that already reside in our cemeteries can only purchase and intern casket remains. That's restrictive to residents only, or non-residents or family. Cremated remains, you can be either a non-resident or resident to inter them.
Right. So with regards to cremated remains, what percentage of the internments are township residents as opposed to outside township residents?
Honestly, Councillor Richter, I'd have to get back to you on that one because I don't have the data off the top of my head.
And I noted with interest the report on page 21, where you're showing the number of cremations as opposed to the number of actual interments of cremations. So my question has to do with something I experienced in my family. Is part of the low number because some people, like if one spouse dies, they'll keep the spouse's ashes until the remaining spouse passes, and then they'll inter the both of them at the same time?
Yeah, that does happen quite occurrence. Or if another loved one passes away, and they sometimes, take advantage of entering 2 or 3 people at the same time.
At the same time.
Yeah.
So if that is happening, are these numbers understated then for internments going forward?
I would.
Are they understated?
Because they just seem really low compared to the number of people who are actually cremated.
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor is picking up on exactly what I was mentioning a moment ago, that fully 80% of people who choose cremation do not bring their cremated remains to a cemetery. They go, out of the cottage or down by the river, or they remain on the mantelpiece, or sadly, in some cases, some communities, 10% are not even picked up from the crematorium. So that's really where we see, to be perfectly crass about it, the total potential market being and a further opportunity for you to serve your residents even that much better with a more fulsome range of cremated remains and interment options. Frankly, I think that not only the issue of the spouses, but people don't know that there are cremated remains and interment options. The word columbarium is not a household word. I think, I'm hoping most of the people in the room understand what it is, but many people don't in our experience. So, did you have anything further to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add we were actually fairly conservative or fairly generous in our projections for cremation in particular, because we assumed that there would be 2 cremated remains per lot interred. I think according to the bylaw, is it 4 that can be interred? It may actually be more. We underestimated, or I'm sorry, I'm saying it the opposite way. We're very generous in saying we're going to need extra space just in case people only decide to put 2 cremated remains in a lot and 1 in a niche in a columbarium. Many niche have room for 2, so we wanted to have that extra space built in.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Oh, yeah, I noticed that we're good till about 2030, so we'll see you folks again in 20 years. I did want to ask you the first thing. They're talking about, I guess, some of your spaces being uneven ground around where the grave placements are. I mean, I don't know what you could do about that, the first question. And my second question is on green burials. There's all sorts of questions on what an actual green burial is, so if I may.
Yeah, I'll tackle the first one. It's just allocating the resources to re-level the area. So we do grave leveling, headstone leveling. It's just a program that seems to continue on because as we know, the ground keeps lowering itself, or it gets because it was dug up, right? It's not compacted anymore, so it keeps settling. So we're dealing with a settlement issue as we go along. So we have a program to deal with that, and to move forward.
Yeah, and that program actually saves money in the long run because then TAB's equipment can run more uniformly across it without scalping equipment or scalping the ground or destroying the equipment. Green burial is predicated on usually at least 4, if not 5, of the following key factors. The first is no embalming. The second is a very simple casket or shroud burial. The third is no concrete liner. The fourth is very simple or quite possibly a communal memorialization. So you're not bringing in exotic headstones from the other side of the world and incurring the kind of carbon footprint in doing that. And the fifth is some form of habitat enhancement or reconstruction. So in this community, that would probably involve planting of dogwoods and firs and cedars and the reconstitution of whatever the ecosystem would be naturally be for that area.
Okay, and part of this plan is to actually begin that process, because I don't imagine there's too many municipalities that do it, and certainly we don't do it right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Your Worship. There are only a couple communities in BC that are doing it now. Royal Oak Burial Park in Victoria is one of the most successful in North America, actually, one of the first into this option for their residents. And there's only a couple other communities that have it in their master plans, and very few in the Lower Mainland.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Kunst.
So you mentioned the heritage, the historic. So there's some historical gravestones in that. How I sit on the Heritage Advisory Committee. Is there any way that the Heritage Committee is involved or needs to be involved?
Yeah. Your Worship, on February 6th, we went, Mr. Lees and I attended the Heritage Advisory Committee, and we brought forward the new concept plan for Fort Langley, and we solicited their input at that time, and they were very supportive of us moving forward with that concept.
Okay, yeah, so I wasn't at that meeting. So the other question, if the City of Langley residents can't get into the township cemetery, where do the city residents potentially go? Are most communities closed to people that don't live there?
There are a few restrictive, like the township is, but a lot of the other ones will take non-residents into their inventory if they need it. So, or private cemeteries is the other option as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I just wanted to correct you there, Mr. Buckner. You mentioned replace the pool with. Just we're not necessarily. Don't want to panic everybody. The two people in Fort Langley that might be listening that we're not necessarily replacing the pool yet. There would be a process for that. So, but I do echo Councillor Richter's thoughts that maybe that would be a good option to combine them with, given that we are assessing that pool. I wanted to ask whether private inventory that might come online is considered as part of the projections of what we need to consider providing.
No, no private inventory was considered.
Because I recently attended a public information meeting regarding a potential private cemetery south of Aldergrove, and so I just wanted just to clarify. So we don't. Is there any way to maybe consider that if the private sector is providing some inventory, maybe we don't have as much of an urgency as it might seem? Just leave that with you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Can we just charge City of Langley residents more to bury to intern them here in the township?
If the worship and council so
We
desires.
could do that? Or triple or quadruple potentially.
I can't, but
Okay. All right. So we'll just again, you can put that into the budget discussion as well potentially. I noticed too, how much space is given to one? What's the terminology? Plot.
correct.
How much space does one?
So a traditional grave lot is a 4x8, and cremated remain lot is usually 2x2. 4x4. In Fort Langley, we're proposing to go in the new section with 4x9, and that is just so we can leave a foot of it undisturbed ground. So if someone wants to put the headstone on it or the flat memorial marker, then it doesn't have such a tendency to settle over time. So, and that seems to be the industry standard now, is moving forward from going away from the 4x8 size to 9x4.
So it's still 4 feet, because I think one of my concerns would be, who do I get placed next to, and how close do I end up getting placed next to them? That doesn't seem like a lot of space. Is it possible to buy two and then put me in the middle of the? Is that possible? Could I pay double and do that?
Currently within the bylaw, that unfortunately the headstone has to be at the head of the actual lot that you were interned in. So then that would fall outside the bylaw.
So the internment, though, would guarantee that I'm picked up from the crematorium? Because you
No.
said 10% or left
Not necessarily.
behind? Not
No.
necessarily?
No.
It would
no.
not. Someone would still have to go pick somebody to get Mayor Frost
Somebody
to
has
go
to
pick
like
me
you.
up. And take me
Correct.
out. Okay, so yeah, I struggle with this use of real estate. Like I know in a lot of parts of the world where there's population is a lot higher, this just isn't practical. Do we reach that point?
I'll let Mr. Lees answer that question based on his knowledge from around the world.
I don't think we've quite reached that point, Mr. Mayor. There are still, in our estimation, cremation is never going to top out much past 80 or 85% because there are those in the community, especially new Canadians, that come with full burial as the only option. In other words, they don't believe in cremation. The Jewish faith, of course, does not believe in cremation. Muslim faith, indigenous communities typically prefer full death burial. So I think we always want to be allowing sufficient room to accommodate those, number one. I think with the advent of green burial, where the land ends up doing much heavier lifting as far as ecological services, that will assuage some of the concerns that you're expressing and that are entirely legitimate. So I also think that do you allow double depth here? I should know that. So that's 2 on top. I can see in the not too distant future where, assuming there's sufficient depth to groundwater, even triple depth burial, and I can see within the next generation that we move away from burying in perpetuity. So that's one person, one grave forever. That's a long time. To the reuse of those graves in some fashion, if not by a same family member, maybe after 30 years, the grave is determined to be free to use again, which is a common case in at least a couple cemeteries. The idea of burying in perpetuity is generally unique to North America. Almost everywhere else in the world reuses those sites. So when you combine that with the community narrative that's told, some of the ecological improvements, as maybe no surprise, I think it's a pretty good use of land, along with the integration of cemeteries as part of the open space fabric, cemeteries as active places for passive recreation, community celebrations like Day of the Dead and Summer Solstice and Qingming festivals and other ceremonies and events of remembrance. These are sacred grounds and they need to be treated like that.
I agree. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson?
Yes, thank you, Worship. And also thank you very much for putting this report together and all the research that you've done, because I think it's really helpful for us to look at what is projected to come and make the right determinations at this point, so we're prepared. I did have a few questions, actually, and I just wanted to pick up on what with some of the topics that came up, and I really like the idea of more of an ecological kind of aspect to a grave site rather than a traditional one, so that you have, it's more like a passive park. When I was thinking about this, and I know that the attempt is to make this cost neutral in terms of how we are keeping our cemeteries over time. But it did occur to me that one of the ideas, to me, it was a bit out of the box, but I know, for example, at Langley Lawn, we want to put in more landscaping, and the idea that we could have something like a legacy tree. There might be some trees that people would be interested in, and they could have a plaque on them, rather than having like a grave site per se, except I was discouraged when I found out that human remains are actually very salty and not good for plants, so it might not be good for scattering gardens. But I thought that aesthetic might be very appealing for some people. I also wondered, it did mention in the report that other cemeteries go through a process of looking at inventory to find out if there's any kind of de facto abandoned plots. Have we undertaken that in the township of Langley to find more inventory?
That's on my work plan for hopefully get started this year and continue next year. It's just a very onerous process to go through all our records in the archive. So we will be undertaking that, Your Worship, in the near future here to try to reclaim, especially at Fort Langley and Murrayville, trying to go through and then find out who has purchased them 50 years ago, and if they're at an age of 90 years old, then we can reclaim those interment rights.
Yeah, my family was actually approached by that one time, and came out of the blue, and I thought, well, they must have gone around buying up all sorts of plots like 50 years ago, and then looking now for people to say, well, would you really want to use this plot, or can we put it back into the inventory that we have? So that makes a lot of sense. I did have a question that arose, and if there was any kind of recommendation from staff. So it's talking about the negative impact on maintenance when people put things that are basically in the way of the mowers. Is there any recommendation of things that we can do? I know a columbaria takes the place of that, because then you can put the ornamentation right on top of it. But for those of us who are tempted to try and put something on the headstone, it's a bit of a problem.
Our staff try to generally work around it and being very respectful of how people like to memorialize their loved one's headstone or memorial marker. It can, and if they do find it that it's becoming an issue, then they will speak with the right holders and work with the individual. But we try to do it on case by case, just realizing that we want to make sure that everybody's well respected, and we are looking after needs, but being mindful of theirs as well.
Well, I'm a culprit, so I just wanted to ask in case there was something else that I should be considering doing. I think that's it for my questions. I really think it's important that we move forward with this, so thank you once again for all your work on the report.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. The reclaiming thing is something out of my way of thinking, because don't want to get into history, but I do. My great grandfather and mother are buried right on Glover. Then in the middle, my grandparents, and now my parents are right on the road in the back. And I don't know what they buried my great grandparents in, but we buried mom and dad in cream cans. So how would you? They're dairy farmers. How would you reclaim something, or are you talking about pieces of property or pieces of lots that don't have, that are the green, like you were saying? How would you do that?
What we're looking at when we talk about reclaiming lots, we're really reclaiming lots that aren't in use currently, or no one is interred in them. Yeah. Those are what we're talking about reclaiming, not existing lots that have people interred in there already.
Okay, because I do know that since in the last, Mom was 8 years or 9 years ago, and it's unbelievable how many tombstones, taller ones, have gone in that area just by the road, I guess, towards Glover. They're just springing up. I don't know. I'm not trying to be cheeky, but has really, the population has grown in that area. Sorry, I didn't get the. But you can't. I was under the understanding that you could put 8 cremations in one lot.
Our bylaw allows in a casket interment lot, you have an option. You can have up to 2 casket burials and 8 cremated remains, or you can have 1 casket and 8 cremated remains.
I guess it depends on the order everyone's going.
Well, you would have to go in if you're going with the option of having 2 caskets and 8 cremated remains. The first casket would have to go in, the second one would have to come next, and then the cremated remains on top. You'd have to do it from the ground up.
Yeah, it's a very emotional thing, because when you mentioned, you can reuse, in 30 years. That's why we put the Muffords on that side, and that's why the Davises are on this side. And it's it's a very emotional thing when it comes to your but it's getting fuller. And so my last question is, and I'm sorry I can't hear very well, Councillor Woodward. I think you touched. Do we have any plans to buy any more inventory? Was that your question? Like more lands?
I've been in contact with our property service department, and if there's opportunities available to buy adjacent property to our existing cemeteries, then they will be pursuing that option.
Only on it, like no new sites?
No new sites. We felt that it's beneficial to try to secure property to adjacent cemeteries so we can rely on the synergies that already exist and just expand into the new areas.
Okay, thank you.
Back.
Worship, on that note, and be careful given the hour because we are still some ways to go on this agenda. I think the purpose of the presentation, in addition to touching upon some of the operational issues, was to point out just a few of the following things. Cemeteries actually can be a break-even or profit center. We see a lot of private interest from time to time about that. We're very fortunate in the township that we have effectively 3 cemeteries. There are other scattered sites that have served as well. Of those sites, I think the message is they are rapidly approaching, and this is in the cemetery world, I guess, capacity. And as we look at the sites, if you look around them, you'll realize, for example, that the Brookswood site is bounded on 4 sides by roads. The Fort Langley site is bounded by development to park and 3 sides by roads. And the Murrayville site is effectively bounded by ravines, and there is a bit of an area that could be expanded to if one were to go north and down the hillside, but that is something we probably will be looking at. But we want to make sure that we're vigilant in looking at those areas going forward, because our capacity, while it may seem to be quite strong now, in 20 or 30 years will be gone, and it'll be very difficult to add to it unless there's more means of reusing the sites that presently exist. And on that note, we are very, very interested in the revenue side of these things, being respectful and making sure our residents come first. The challenge we have with third-party sites, as Councillor Woodward pointed out, was simply that they may have denominational restrictions. There can be lots of complications that occur with those, and we are still exploring the benefit of some of the private sector opportunities that exist, but we do so with a bit of a sense of skepticism. And the other thing that was quite interesting was stacking, and I was wondering if Councillor Woodward and Councillor Davis would consider sharing one of those plots now, because it creates some interesting opportunities.
So 1 + 8 is allowed in one plot. I think we could maybe come to an agreement here on this. There's 9 of us.
Who's going to go first? Who's going to go first?
We'll draw straws. Councillor Kunst.
Just one quick question. Are there any cemeteries under power lines?
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes, there are, or within the easement, correct.
Because, yeah, I mean, we all know Langley Lawn is right close to power lines. So is that something, and could the city participate since they have land under power lines very close to Langley Lawn? I mean, it's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very enlightening. Oh, Councillor Richter.
Oh, no, I've got to, when we get to
I'm
the
going to
report.
clear the queue, and we're just going to go to the reports. F1, if I can get a motion on that. Councillor Long, seconder. Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Richter on F1.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should perhaps share this report with the city and recommend that they start considering looking for cemetery space within their boundaries going forward.
Certainly, I think we could do that. Could we do that just by direction, Mr. Backer? Unless you want it, because
effectively, it's simply to refer the report to the city for information, so we can do that, Your Worship.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'll add that as an amendment. It's amended to refer this report to the city. Second by Councillor Kunst. Any discussion on the amendment? Can we call the question on just the amendment? Carries with Councillor Long opposed. And on the main motion, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on F1 as amended. Main motion as amended. Carries unanimously. Move on to F2. Thank you very much. You're welcome to stay, but it doesn't get any more exciting. The UBCM Housing Needs Reports Program, and this is submitting an application. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arneson, seconder. Councillor Kunst. Councillor Richter.
Yes, I had a question with regards to the financial implications paragraph on page 3, where it says it is anticipated that the $70,000 maximum grant would be sufficient to cover the project costs. do we have any guarantees on that? And if we don't have a guarantee on that, are we setting some additional monies aside?
Your Worship, there are no guarantees, and we do have existing funds that can be utilized. In fact, that was the plan, to utilize existing budgets, and if the application for the grant is successful, then those funds can be allocated to other projects.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you, if I may, through the chair. This is a particular requirement that the province wants all communities to do? That's the first question. The second one is, are we able to work with, say, one of our First Nations, Kwantlen or Katesee, to share our applications or to help them along, if I may, through the chair?
It is a requirement, Your Worship, and it's actually a requirement for local governments. I don't know if the same applies to First Nations. Yeah. It's a requirement of local governments. Certainly we can work with them. Yeah.
Okay, what about the second question about working with Kwantlen First Nation or Katesee?
Your Worship, I thought I answered the two questions at the same time. I guess the requirement doesn't apply. It doesn't extend to First Nations governments. So I don't know if they have the same requirement to undertake a housing needs assessment or not. If they do, certainly we can work with them.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Long.
Thanks, Your Worship. Of course, I'm supporting this, but I just want to make sure the Council is aware that we undertake a study to establish the housing needs. That means we have to support the recommendations. And to some respect, we're not fettered by it, but just reminding that when the recommendations come back that we need more housing, then we have to make sure that we approve the projects that come forward.
Thank you. But it could be that we're advocating to levels of government that have that jurisdiction. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Well, further to Councillor Long's point, I think that since it is mandated and they're getting money for it, I think this is a perfect opportunity, because I've always felt that the market doesn't consider what our social need is. And therefore, the challenge is, as we continue to build out, there's many different needs and factions that aren't being addressed at the time of making determinations about if we're looking at neighborhood plans, if we're looking at infill, whatever it is. So irrespective, I don't think that we're falsely setting up people's expectations and then we have to deliver, because I just referred to the Housing Action Plan. It has a strategy and then there are timelines. So I don't think it means that we're mandated to suddenly fund all of the things that are there, but I think it's necessary to have a roadmap to understand what we need to provide.
Thank you. I see no further discussion, so I'm going to call the question on F2. Carries unanimously. Move on to F3, and this is Fraser Valley Regional Library request to fund self-checkout units and data line upgrades for libraries. Motion, please. Councillor Kunst, and second by Councillor Ferguson. Just a quick question for staff, Mr. Backen. This is not a very large amount of money, and so I'm just wondering why it's coming before council.
It's actually a requirement of the board, the Fraser Valley Library Board, that they come to council. We inquired as to whether or not this could be done at the staff level, but it's their constitutional articles that require a motion to council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I'm a little puzzled by this. When I read the reserve description on page 4, it says all assets purchased with conditional grants from this reserve are owned by the respective member, who is responsible for all related maintenance, insurance, and other ongoing and replacement costs. Now, is that the current situation, for example, in the Aldergrove Library? Because I go to that library fairly often, and I was just in on the weekend, and they've got a brand new self-serve checkout there with all kinds of new bells and whistles on it, and I'm just wondering what was wrong with the old one, and did we pay for that new one, and are we doing the replacement and maintenance costs for the new one? Like, I don't like this condition, is what I'm saying.
Your Worship, that condition is common to all assets. So for the Fraser Valley Regional Library, all assets that they're possessed are owned for the benefit of their stakeholders. So in all situations, it's the community that has to actually purchase, maintain, and utilize. And the circumstance why this one's a bit different is really because the budget year is closed for them when they're adding this one to the system, and they're using the reserve fund. So rather than being built in part of their operating budget, the council would review every year their operating and capital budget. It's simply here because this is coming from the reserve fund, and while nominal, it does require a resolution of council, but it will be ours to maintain and to own as with all those other assets that were referenced.
So we do actually maintain the current self-serve checkouts in the other
Correct,
libraries?
financially. There's contractors that do it, but we pay the fees to actually make sure that occurs as part of our operating budgets.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Long?
Quickly, Your Worship, it says in the recommendation that the funding will come from the township share of the reserve fund. So how much of that is in there? I mean, there's 21,000 is going to be expended, or 25,200. Is there? Obviously, there's enough in there, but what is the balance of the fund by?
Looks to be about 290,000.
Oh, we got plenty there. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Arneson?
Yes, thank you, Worship. As the library representative, I'm very supportive of this. I think that we have wonderful libraries, but we need to keep up to date with the technologies that we have. So something like a self-scanner is really a transactional efficiency that we've advanced in the library, so that people who go there, if there happens to be a lineup, can go through there and put their books through faster. And just to clarify, Mr. Backen, I think, gave a good description of what the status is of the equipment there, but I just look at it as a chattel that actually belongs then to it's like something that we own then as a Fraser Valley Regional Library, but they're movable in the event that you would have a different leasehold, at least for some of them. I think the checkout stations could be relocated to somewhere else if that were necessary, rather than just, getting rid of it. That's my understanding.
That's all very true, very correct. The point being that if we were to form our own library, in theory, those chattels could be reclaimed.
Right.
They wouldn't be, though, because of the fact they've got dedicated software and all sorts of things. So.
Okay, but we don't want to leave, so that's okay.
Correct.
Councillor Richter?
Yeah, I had one more question. Maybe Mr. Backen can answer it. With regards to the actual fund that they're using for this, the Library Member Salary and Benefit Reserve, is the use of this reserve to purchase equipment that will eliminate jobs something that will be palatable to the...
The fund is actually, the tag on the fund is really just any surplus funds that were not expended and can be identified as being generated by or on behalf of the township. The fund itself is very much a capital and operating contingency, I guess, or a surplus, as we would call it. The issue of the effect on labor would be left to the Fraser Valley Regional Library Board to determine that they're managing it, so they'd have to deal with those issues, but we believe that this is viewed as being more as to automation than replacement. I think it's something that makes the jobs easier as opposed to eliminates the jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on F3. That carries unanimously. And Mark present. Move on to correspondence. There is 4 items of correspondence. Could I have a motion to receive all 4? Councillor Ferguson, second. Councillor Davis, discussion on the receipt. Councillor, okay, so I'm going to call the question on receipt. That carries unanimously. And so I'm just going to quickly go through the first 3. I believe our procedure is that we take no action on those. And the 4th one, council may refer the application to the license inspector with or without comment. So I'll open up to questions. Councillor Richter.
Well, actually, I wanted to address G3.
Okay.
Is it okay
Sure,
if
yeah,
I do
sure,
that
yeah.
now? I believe that in the past we have flown a fibromyalgia flag, as they are a recognized group in the community. And I know our policy has changed. I'm just wondering, in contacting the Fibromyalgia Foundation, if we could explain to them that the policy has changed in the very recent past.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would be appropriate. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have already let them know.
Yeah? Okay, great,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. Okay. So on G4, Mr. Backen, we can just leave it as a receipt, or do we need to do anything? No action, then it's...
It is sufficient.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. As before, when we had prior applications, I would just like to make a note and ask that 30% of the 6 new taxis be accessible. The rationale for that is that as we continue to have expanding need in our community, we don't have Uber, and handy dart services are very limited. So I think it would really address a lot of the needs for people who require more accessibility if we could have just a percentage of the taxis that would be of accessible design.
So Mr. Backen, that would require a motion to send with that comment?
Correct.
Okay, so it's moved by Councillor Arneson, second by Councillor Richter. So it's on G4. Discussion, Councillor Long.
Your Worship, of course, it's a good initiative, but wouldn't you want to examine the entire fleet and find out how many they already have, perhaps, that are accessible or
No,
not?
it's in the report, and I believe they're about, I can't recall off the top of my head.
So it's not a high enough percentage already then?
Yeah. But these are just comments. We're not, it's up to the province to.
Okay, so does the motion that we're
license.
voting on have a number, or does it says that a good percentage should be?
It's 30% of the 6, so that would be 2.
And again, it's just comments. The province will make their own determination. Okay, so I'm going to call the question on G4. Carries unanimously. Move on to minutes. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes from Recreation and Culture Parks. Sorry? No, that is the motion. The motion was to forward it on with that comment. So there's not an amendment. 4 minutes. Could I have a motion to receive?
Receive all, Your Worship.
I receive all.
Receive all.
Okay, Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Kuntz. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call a question on each one. Carries unanimously. And there's also I received all of them, including the Council Priorities Committee meeting, which was, yeah, there it is. Okay, so associations and other government agencies. We have the minutes from the Joint School District number 35, Municipal Liaison Committee. Can I have a motion to receive? Councillor Woodward, seconder. Councillor Ferguson, discussion on I-1. Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Long. Councillor Long.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I was reading the minutes, and it looks like the school district must have prepared them because there's a little bit of an error in the description of who's who in there. But I was wondering if the committee couldn't maybe mention who is moving what, because there's a number of items there, like moving the school, and I don't know if that's an initiative that the township has or does the school district. It doesn't really say in the minutes. It just says that there was discussion about this, that, and the other thing. But I imagine that each side of the committee makes recommendations or discussion points. So maybe the minutes could be a little bit more descriptive in who's talking about what. That's what I found when reading the
Mr. Backen, just take that direction.
Share that request, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Call the question on I-1. Carries unanimously. And we have Councillor Richter. Do you have other business? We've got to go through all the Councillor Richter.
Oh, no, I was wanting to address,
So we're going to be going through the notice of motions that are already on.
J4, okay, I'm ahead of my.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll just clear the queue. Okay. Councillor Arneson, I'll put you on. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Since this was adjourned from our last meeting, I think I'll just read the whole thing again. Whereas the Township of Langley has a housing action plan that was adopted in 2013, which outlines the need for local government to provide a housing continuum and options in order to respond to the current and future residential needs of the community, and whereas there is a shortage of affordable housing options related to supply and demand, high land values, scarcity of developable lands, and other exacerbating factors eroding affordability, and whereas there is a demonstrable need to consider a variety of housing typologies, including smaller homes, as a way to enhance affordability, therefore be it resolved that Council directs staff to contact Small Housing BC, whose mandate is to educate and inform a variety of stakeholders with respect to the thoughtful design of smaller housing options in order to request a tailored presentation at an upcoming CPC meeting with respect to the possible introduction of smaller housing options within the TOL based on a process to include public engagement, staff review, and Council's consideration of the matter.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Second by Councillor Davis. Discussion, or did you want to speak to it, Councillor Arneson?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Just quickly. I attended the workshop last year and noted that what was interesting to me was there were a number of very successful case studies that were outlined. And I think that more than anything in the last year, we've realized that affordability is a real challenge for us in our community. And so it made sense to me that there was an opportunity to call upon those who are involved in setting out a variety of options for local government consideration. It's a nonprofit organization, and I thought that a presentation to council would be helpful in order to educate us and to help with our decision making. Once the needs assessment comes through, there might be an opportunity, and we would be well informed prior to that happening.
Thank you. Any other discussion, questions? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Davis.
I attended a meeting that they had they were experiencing small houses, and I think that it gave an option. It gave there was little community. It had. It looked good. I think we need to have a look at it, and we need to have a presentation so that all council members here can have a look at, and it's an option. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Long?
I don't think Councillor Davis could fit in one of those tiny homes. So these are tiny homes we're talking about. Is there currently any?
Not necessarily.
Well, okay. Are there zoning allowances for tiny homes, let's just say, in the township currently?
There is nothing precluding tiny homes.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to have the presentation, a tiny presentation.
All right, with round doors, right? All right, I'm going to call the question on J1. Carries unanimously. And Councillor Woodward. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Ms. Bauer, if you can bring up that slide that I emailed you earlier today, would help, I think, inform council as well. I won't read all the whereases, but I will read the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that staff, because I hope council had a chance to read through the whereases, but therefore be it resolved that A, staff be directed to report back and present to council as soon as practical a new draft distinct community amenity contributions policy for council's consideration, with recommendations reviewing little a, mechanisms for the fair and reasonable capture of a portion of significant wealth created by land rezonings and or subdivisions with OCP or neighborhood plan amendments for increased residential or commercial density that do place additional substantial burdens upon the municipality. B, fair and reasonable percentage of land speculation value increases to consider in regards to the substantial burdens potentially placed upon the municipality, potentially impact the development, scope of the policy, and potential revenue that could be generated for specific initiatives such as affordable housing, recreation facilities, additional ice rinks, and or an arts and entertainment theater. And then capital B, that staff advise all proponents with current development applications that meet the above noted criteria in AA of this potential policy adoption. That C, staff request all proponents with current development applications that meet the above noted criteria in AA comply with this potential policy's intent before their applications are brought forward with council's consideration and advise of the proponent's position within any staff reports. And D, that staff complete and present their review and draft policy for council's consideration before any development applications that meet the above noted criteria in AA are brought forward for council's consideration. I so move. Thank you.
Seconder? Second by Councillor Richter. Councillor Woodward, did you wish to
yeah, I would like to speak to it. So just briefly for council's information, this slide was given to us as part of the presentation by staff when they reviewed the Aldergrove reform and the CAC reform, and this was specifically something that was outlined as missing or potential gap in our current CAC policy. So that's the basis of the motion. So when it comes to having development actually pay for development, we need to do better for our residents than we have been. Development is supposed to be a partnership between residents and the municipality and developers. We have some speculators and developers pursuing extraordinary situations that we need our community amenity policies to catch up with. Our staff highlighted this in their presentation about the proposed community amenity reform for downtown Aldergrove, extraordinary land speculation profits that we really don't capture with a fixed rate per unit policy that is already very developer friendly with some of the lowest amenity rates in the region. And I thought it'd be helpful to try to illustrate this for council with an example. So let's say, for example, we have someone that owns 10 acres of farmland within the agricultural land reserve worth, I'm just picking numbers, $150,000 per acre. Then this someone applies to the Agricultural Land Commission to have it removed from the ALR and are successful. Now they have urban land. Then the someone can apply for a community plan amendment and rezoning to build townhouses, say 20 units per acre, 200 units. Rezoned for townhouses, the land is now worth something approximate 2.5 to 3 million per acre. And in this example, this potential land speculation profit of up to 30 million, even with servicing costs, place additional burdens upon the municipality in terms of higher land costs, the need for more services for these residents. Is this fair? Is this a partnership? So say someone has 2.5 acres of land in Willoughby designated for townhouses, and now they want a high-rise. Maybe a high-rise can make sense, depending on the location, the need for transit, people to take the transit. Maybe some green space can be preserved. This someone then buys that for 2.5 or 3 million an acre, then applies for a community plan amendment to rezone that into a high-rise or two. This is the exact example staff gave in their presentation a few months ago. Then we have this high-rise land that's now worth 7, maybe to 8 million an acre, just picking numbers. Land speculation profit in the millions, not having built anything in both of those cases. Is that a partnership? This is speculation profit created by an amazing subdivision design or an amazing townhouse apartment, is because people want to live in Langley, where our taxpayers pay to subsidize everything we provide, from multiple recreation centers to parks, trail networks, preserving the charm of our rural areas with decreased taxation. Township of Langley residents and taxpayers substantially fund and subsidize the improvements that make Langley so desirable. It drives these land values and development profits. So it's important also to clarify what the policy review is not about. It's not about someone with a townhouse or apartment site designated as such in our community plan. Not about someone who's lived in Willoughby for a decade or more, now with their land value intact. It's not about the vast majority of development that we see every day. But for these extraordinary situations, we need to look at it. Development needs to be a partnership, and as a municipality, we need to work with the development community to generate investment, jobs, develop our urban land, and build a community. People have the right to develop their urban land, but with a few of these special categories, ALR exclusions, big upzonings, this type of speculation is driving up land costs, adding density and residential burdens, which all of our taxpayers have to pay for. And someone who will hold for a high-rise, not sell or develop, and make millions down the road for having done almost nothing. Walking off with 100% of tens of millions of speculation profits while the Township of Langley taxpayers gets none of that. That is not, to me, a partnership. That is one-sided. We need to get real about development paying for itself and the burdens that we have as a municipality, and we have to address it. Currently, development is not paying for development. We need to review it. I ask the council send this to staff for review to present policy options and considerations. That's all this is at this point, as outlined in the motion, to let proponents know we are reviewing this and ask them for a real partnership and get the initial review and presentation before we consider some of these extraordinary applications currently under review. As a council, I'd like to hope we would show leadership on this and get closer to moving forward with development actually paying for development. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. A couple of questions, or just, I don't see in what you have here in front of us is density bonusing, which is fairly well understood, I think, in the region. What you have in your motion is not fairly well understood. It's, just hang on. So it's asking that, okay, so you gave some great scenarios, and I was thinking about this, different scenarios also. So somebody buys some land for $150,000, magically gets it out of the agricultural land reserve, and can put a tower on it, which I think would be extremely remote in my lifetime. But then it's now worth $2 million, but he hasn't got it rezoned yet, and then flips it and sells it. There's no hold on him. So now you have somebody who purchases it, and now they wish to go for rezoning, and so they have to put some costs into it to make it serviceable, and so it might cost them, now it's another $500,000, and they're able to build something on it, or they flip it again. then we're going to capture that plus or minus 50% of the lift. But meanwhile, the profit has been made by the first person who sold it and didn't have to. There's no rezoning. He just applied to the Agricultural Land Commission, and they removed it, and he flips it over and sells it. So I find that difficult to understand. The other one is take a piece of property in Willoughby. Somebody buys it for $2 million. Still, it's we have a plan that's 20 years old that's designated that as some sort of a multifamily use. Buys it for $2 million, sells it for $3 million, but hasn't gone for rezoning yet. So the person buys it, or maybe it's flipped again a couple times, and now it's worth $4 million. But meanwhile, the profit's been has been obtained by the original owners, and now the poor developer, I wouldn't say poor developer, but the guy who wants to actually put some housing on there, pays us $3-4 million for it, puts the services in, tries to make his points on the housing units. Depending on what the market's like, it goes up and down. We certainly see that all the time. How is that fair? I just don't quite understand. Maybe you can just help me on that one, because I understand this density bonusing. That I understand. This I don't. And maybe it needs more work from staff to come back.
I think it does. I think it does have to go to staff. So when this slide was up, it was specific to density bonusing, but during that part of the presentation, there was a discussion about how fixed rate CACs don't really capture the additional value and the burden that some of these upzonings can create, so that if you're adding hundreds of units to a site in the form of a high-rise, fixed rate CACs really don't capture that, in my opinion. And I think that was suggested that our current CAC policy doesn't really address that. In the terms of and I think we can get a lot more information on that. I think there's a number of other examples I could have outlined, but I only had 10 minutes. The thought process around people flipping it after it's the ALR example, that to me, that's probably less likely if it's not already got a designation or a zoning that someone is going to pass on that profit instantly. To me, there's a certain amount of things that have to occur first in regards to the municipality. I don't know very many people who purchase developable land who don't visit the second floor counter, and would be probably presented with the difficulties of maybe getting an approval if we had a policy in place. So while that example may be helping, I think that's the reason I'd like to get it to staff, at least for Part A.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I had a question with regards to number 5 in the whereases and numbers A, small a, and small b in the therefore be it resolved, with regards to whether or not the wording there has been looked at from a legal perspective or run by a lawyer. I'm wondering if maybe staff could provide some insight on if that was done, and if it wasn't done, should it be done?
Back.
Your Worship, focusing on the clauses A, small b, and small c, and the balance of it, there's been no, to our knowledge, any legal analysis done. That could be done as part of the direction Council provides if this goes forward. The whereas clauses, as they are simply explanatory, we don't usually have those analyzed in any event. Okay.
I'm wondering, Mr. Mayor, then, if I could request division on this motion.
Yeah,
okay.
Ms. Bauer, I don't know if we can divide this motion. I know we had some discussion on division, and when one part and one part, if each part for division can stand on its own, it can be divided. But this motion has subsequent sections that cannot stand on their own without the other one. So I know we looked at this for division, and your advice was that it cannot be divided. That the whole thing's moved. Amendments can be made by council.
Amendments can be made. So in the case of Councillor Richter, she may wish to make an amendment that it be forwarded to legal counsel as well as sent back to staff. But it's very difficult in this case. If A doesn't happen, then A, small b, small c aren't valid. So therefore, it's very difficult to divide the motion itself.
Not by dividing like the large A, the large B, the large C, the large D.
I have a point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so point of order.
Or maybe clarification, if you'll allow it.
Hold.
To help.
No, it's point of order. You can ask for point of order.
I'll withdraw that.
Okay. So Councillor Richter, if this helps, I know I want to hear from, there's two other speakers, I want to hear what they have to say, and then I'm looking at a motion, I'm thinking of a motion, and we'll see what council says, and it could be added, what you're asking for can be added to that, and mine will be something like just, and I know this is going to staff to come back with a report, but I think this one comes back with a new community amenity contributions policy, like a one step, back up one step, have it forwarded to staff for review of the concept and implications and consultation, and then perhaps we can look at directing staff if we so desire at that time. And also at the same time, we could ask for what you've asked for, a legal opinion. So if that helps, we'll go through the next. Let's see if anything else to
in
add.
terms of division, can't we just divide, like, keep the small A, B, and C together under the large A, so that would be one division. The other division would be the big B, the third division would be the big C, and the fourth division would be the big D.
My information from the clerk is that we can't.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back to...
I got it for the small A, B, and C, but I don't see why.
Your Worship, the challenge would be, and we're just exploring this now, is that I think small A, B, and C work well, but if A is defeated, can B, C, or D proceed independently of A? That's the challenge. And that would be the issue. So it may be, it's not really a motion to divide, it's really to have separate motions, but I think you're right. If we can hear the rest of the discussion, we can try to come up with a solution.
Thank you. Councillor Long?
Well, it's fascinating, and I've tried as best as I can to understand all the pieces, because there's a lot of them there. I think I'd like to explore what's being proposed here. I think there's some research that's been done, and this is the second time it's come to council. I guess we ran out of time last time. But rather, what troubles me or concerns me is that there's some recommendations kind of built into it already, which we may not be ready to embark upon. And I think the mover's already saying that we need staff's opinion back, or maybe a roadmap on how do we get here or there. So depending what happens with the rest of the discussion, Your Worship, I think that this should be, staff, could staff not give us a report back and critique the whole thing and maybe advise us on how we can proceed without having to divide or vote on this now or vote on that now, without squishing or punting into the Never Never Land. I think this needs to go to staff to get to harvest it, let's say, and come back to council with a very comprehensive report that we can spend a bit more time reading, and some logical recommendations perhaps from it that we can all support. I'm not sure without seeming ignorant, but I cannot really understand all of it. It's so complex. And I'd be interested to see it flushed right through, and we have the staff that can do it. So I don't know if that was what your motion was going to be.
That's basically what it is. It's a little bit of an interim
But
step.
I would say if the referral shouldn't say we should be voting on anything here, but other than a referral for more information.
Right. And there's always unintended consequences if we don't look into it deeply, like provinces tried to do in speculation taxes and that sort of thing. So it'd be good to get full information. Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, so I would be all for the referral as well, just because I have a lot of questions. And one of them would be the impact this would have on development in Langley. So the very thing that we want to do is fix our roads, and would that stop development, and would developers not want to do business here? So that would just be something I'd be concerned about. And if there's a lower, like right now the market's depressed, what kind of impact would that have on people who are building towers? And now would we we want to benefit from the developer, but we don't want to also take the risks that the developer takes. So anyway, that was just a comment.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an interesting debate we're having now, because I guess any time you were to knock on a door or talk to any citizen in Langley, or perhaps throughout the region, they would all come up with the statement, they don't believe that the development community is paying enough, or the business community is paying enough. And then you read or hear about something in Vancouver where they're it's almost boggles the mind, where they're asking their residents to raise their 2% tax to pay for businesses, some challenges they have. So it depends on what you're reading or listening to, but it's certainly a challenge out there. And it seems to be the emperor's new clothes. I mean, the people don't realize that small communities and we're still a small community like Langley and Delta and Port Moody and Port Coquitlam and a few others, that we do not have a casino. And Richmond and Coquitlam and to a lesser degree Langley City and Burnaby, they to date, some of them, not all of them, not Langley City, have raised over $100 million in casino revenues without a single addition of police or anything. It's just a cash grab, and they're able to do things in their community that folks like us in Langley and Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, and Delta aren't able to do. Now, it's a debate. Obviously, we can raise our fees and charges and DCCs and see as much as we want. We can raise them, and we can say we're going to go out to the community and we're going to punish all those people that I've knocked on the doors that say they don't like that community, because they have made, according to this item 5, extraordinary land speculation profit. So I have a friend who's a senior, and she owns her and her husband own a property in Willoughby, and they're working with the township staff to break it up to 2 lots. Now, this lady is now doing an extraordinary land speculator. Her and her husband, who are both seniors, and there's so many examples of people, young and old, that have a property that they maybe had for a while, or maybe they haven't had for a while. They don't see themselves as being land speculators, but going through the process. So their fees will be going up as well as others, and there's costs, and involves time, and all these challenges. And I don't know if I agree with your example that the Land Commission, maybe perhaps Councillor Davis can help me, is accepting exclusion status immediately on all agricultural properties. I don't know if that's something that's going, and you're right, if we broke down somebody's farm, 100 or 200 acres, and put in 1,000 units or something, yeah, they'd make a lot of money. I don't know if that happens, but it's certainly a good example. I mean, that could happen if 100 or 200 acres were taken out of the land reserve immediately. I mean, with very little help, and they just given the zoning. You're right. There'd be a lot of money made. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with this motion, but I agree that yes, we need to get fair. And we need for development to pay for ourselves, but we are in the township of Langley is in a difficult place because we don't have that emperor's new clothes, and that's another door I could knock on everybody's door in the whole community, whole region. They wouldn't know what I was talking about. Where does the casino money go? They don't know. And we don't have it. And the thing is that why we're not able to develop the same thing. And also back to the last thing is density. I think, and maybe staff can answer, I'm not going to ask a question because we're going to have more questions later. I think the township of Langley probably is one of the least dense areas in the whole region. And that's why our quality of life is the way we have made it, because we didn't want the huge densities, the big towers that Burnaby's building today, and Vancouver already has, and Surrey wants more and more and more, and they seem to think if you put more and more people into a community, everybody's going to be happier. And I don't know if I agree with that. And it's certainly not being the position of the Township of Langley. So that's why we've got so many challenges. And whether we're able to solve it in 1 year, I don't know, or 6 months. But certainly we can have this discussion at a CPC or something on. I just don't know where we can go from here. I'm kind of confused because the wording is very complex. It's very difficult to understand, but that doesn't mean to say we can't have that discussion as where we go in the future. And I think, Mr. Mayor, you've got a task force or something coming up as well to look at other issues. But anyway, that's my 2 cents, if I may.
Thank you. Yeah, and the task force won't be looking at CACs. That's not what it's going to be doing. But Councillor Davis.
That was more like a $10 bill, Steve. It actually did happen at Terra. The Land Commission it took it out, and it happened at Terra. Anyhow, I look at this, and I'm just wondering if my take is, if you want to eat an elephant, you eat it one bite at a time. And I'm just worried, Councillor Woodward. We talked about OCPs, and if they were respected instead of everything getting upzoned. But I guess that's not reality. It comes up here all the time. And I think there's an awful lot in here, and it has confused me the last 2 or 3 days that I've been looking at it. And there are things in here that I just worry, maybe, I don't know, this isn't a very good question to staff, but maybe they could try. Is it going to be easy to come back with something that we could look at? Because it does get kind of specific, and there's certain areas that are really sharp, and I'm just worried that staff has got to come back with something, and will that restrict them the way they think? I don't know. I'm all over the map here, but I'm just concerned that this is a pretty big notice of motion, and it will, if they do exactly what's on here, will it capture what the motion of it? That's what I'm concerned about. So maybe it's a tough question, but is it something, if staff takes this, will they have problems? It's not, I don't know.
Mr. Backen?
Worship, I have many problems. If you have some time, I can go into some detail.
Don't have that much time.
The coming before council is always challenging, but we understand the concept here. The concept is certainly one with some merit in that it's trying to raise additional revenue from the development process. But as you referenced, there's many implications to that, from the methodology to the start point to the triggering mechanism, all of those things. I think we understand that the motion here is intending to cover all of those points. So it would be possible for us to come back with an analysis of the framework in terms of this, in terms of the graphic you have before you that would be triggered by such things as when is it triggered, ALR applications, rezonings, OCPs, all those things, what the implications are for those, what the implications are for our resources in terms of when we're trying to meet these challenges of a growing community, and as well some of the challenges we have in terms of dealing with expectations both of residents and of the development community. One of the key things this would do in the longer term is it would actually have a price effect on the pricing of land in the marketplace, because, of course, at the end of the day, there's a set return the development community seeks. The return will be met over the long term one way or the other, and that will be determined by the raw price of the land itself. So it certainly has a lot of merit. Other communities are doing it. It is a very complex topic. The motion is very detailed and well thought out, but yes, it does take some time to digest.
Just to follow up, really make it a little more, maybe, is the prices in Metro Vancouver making this more of an issue? And it's all in the news, they're talking about laundering money, and as our land values artificially up, I mean, I don't know, is that had anything to do with it? Or maybe that'd be a good question, maybe that would be more better question to Councillor Woodward, or go ahead.
Very quickly, the situation in Greater Vancouver is there's actually a limited supply of land. The more demand there is for that land, the more the price goes up. When you take away some of the demands, such as people who have lots of cash and don't have an ability to use it anymore, that affects your demand, therefore reducing it somewhat. So the backdrop of the fact that we have limited supply, we have had fairly easy currency exchanges has certainly had an impact, but as well immigration will have an impact. In migration, birth rates will have an impact over the longer term, because we're a very defined area with a population base that grows, and while there'll be ebbs and flows in the pricing of it, it's going to have an impact. Those impacts also affect services. They affect concrete, they affect pipes, they affect telecommunications. All those things come into the bundle of it, and at the end of the day, those costs have to be recovered, and the way it's recovered is by the wholesale price of the land. That'll be the output from this that will change over time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I appreciate all those comments. I just had a couple of questions, Mr. Bracken, on a potential process here. But I wanted to just clarify some of the comments, though, like in terms of how it may affect the raw price of land or development going forward. I did try to specify that it really only would affect a relatively small number of applications, and of that subset, not really affect most of them very substantially. So I do like the analogy of eating an elephant one bite at a time. really don't think that it would apply. And I think I said also very clearly that it doesn't affect Councillor Ferguson's friends in Willoughby who've owned the property for 20 or 30 years and have a designation within a completed neighborhood plan. That's not, and if they're developing to that neighborhood plan, it's very specific in here. Neighborhood plan and OCP amendments are what's required to trigger it. The ALR exclusion that I was discussing as an example would require a neighborhood plan or OCP amendment. So these are different layers, and I appreciate that that it might be difficult to digest in 3 or 4 days. Of course, we only get the package on Thursday afternoon. Maybe we don't get it till Friday, and it's only a couple of days. So I'd support if there's some idea that it's not intended to send it away for 6 months. If there's a way for council to get comfortable on maybe placing each one of these capital categories in context with an explanation and how it may affect our existing processes. Would it be possible to have that worded for me in a way that would be helpful to staff and for council, for it to come back with some explanation, not dependent upon myself?
I think
would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think so. Mr. Backen can maybe help with it, but refer this motion to staff for review of the concept and implications to the building community and to the town, to the residents, and it should include some maybe Mr. Backen. I'm just throwing it out there. So Mr. Backen's really good at getting these things together that work for his staff, and include some consultation with the industry. Also, we want to put in the legal some legal advice on this. I think.
So for me, I mean, I don't know. I'm happy to maybe do division on how you want to structure, Mr. Mayor. But the consultation with the development community is obviously going to be negative, so I don't see the point.
But we do have to hear from them because they're a big part of this, and this is very common throughout the region. My colleague in Coquitlam tells us how when they wanted to build a SkyTrain station, the increased density that brought to that area, they were able to pay for that SkyTrain station, and they actually recover a lot of money. Density bonusing is a good thing when it's certainly it's over and above what's allowed. We're saying, okay, you can put some more density in here, maybe SkyTrain's coming in or some other amenity, and we can capture that land lift and put it back into our infrastructure. So I think it's important to hear from the development community because they are part of it. We can divide it. I have no problem with that. But
maybe premature is all. I think that maybe it's appropriate to have it come back first before we embark on a public consultation process.
It'd be nice to hear what other municipalities are doing. So that's part of the the review. So Mr. Backen, maybe you can help me out there. And
Your Worship, we may wish to stack the motions just for procedural effectiveness, but I think the first part is refer to staff for a report on the concept, appropriate legal process and economic implications. Now this is where it gets a bit vague, to the residents and the development community, or?
Well, I think to the Township of Langley. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, so that includes,
I'd even move it.
Yeah, so we can do that one separately. Okay. I mean, certainly having that come back first, and then, but prior to going to any development of any further CACs or density bonusing, we do need to consult with the community, and that includes the development community. We've done that in the past.
Yeah, that's been the past practice, Your Worship, but I think the question could be resolved by the basis of referring it to staff for a report on the concept, appropriate legal process, and economic implications to residents and the Township of Langley. Yeah. Then that can come back, and then council can determine if they wish to proceed further, such as development community, or not go any further, whatever may there can come. But then we can actually get a framework that would give some time for further discussion and debate.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, so the only concern, of course, there is just we're not going to run off and involve the UDI, for example, for 6 months and slow this down, and for them to function as a purpose to slow this down. We would defer that till we get the response and help council with some understanding of where this is going and how actually very limited it actually is.
Correct. I think that may or may not follow. This is probably likely going to end up in some sort of presentation and a report, just so there's some comfort. We understand what the triggering mechanisms are. You quite appropriately referenced the triggering being potential ALR applications, OCP amendments, rezonings in certain circumstances. We've got to kind of flesh out the hierarchy of that, and then once that's in place.
Just again to clarify, it's very specific, OCP amendments with increased density. Okay. Right, so there may be others that would be an OCP amendment that this wouldn't trigger. So that would be very helpful to get that outlined for all of council.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'd move that if that's what we're looking for someone to move that.
Okay, so it's moved. I was just going to hear from Council Long quickly, then we'll take it. Council Long? No,
I was
okay.
just happy to help maybe try and fashion a motion, which it sounds like you've got, so I'll second it or support
Okay,
it.
so
for
Councilor
sure.
Woodard moves it, second by Councilor Long. Discussion on the referral. Councilor Ferguson on the referral.
I wanted to have a clarification. So we're referring the actual items that we listed up, but not necessarily the main motion itself with its inherent comments and points.
We're referring this motion to staff and for the reasons that Mr.
Okay,
Beck.
well, when inside the motion on the number 2D, it requires a drafting a policy. Are you expecting to draft a policy as well? No, I didn't think
report
so.
back.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Be clear, Your Worship, it's Big A, Big B, Big C, and Big D. The components of the motion are going to be referred to staff, along with the whereas clauses, but we'll be focusing on the capital letters.
Thank you. Councilor Davis?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. We're going to refer the whole thing. Do they have a set of headphones in there I can plug in?
I'll ask Mr. Backen to, or
I
Ms.
should
Bauer.
have done this an hour ago.
Yeah, that's fine.
But the whole motion is going
That's right.
undivided?
That's right.
Yeah, okay, that's
So that we'll
simple.
get some information back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Are we all clear on the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question then.
Thank you.
Okay, two. Carries unanimously. Move on to J3, and I'm just going to start clearing. Councillor Long.
Okay.
Councillor Long.
Yeah, all right. So the motion is only a couple of paragraphs there, so I can't even find it now. It's gone here. But it's a, why don't I have it on here? Anyway, it is, isn't that funny? Is it missing from your Granicus?
So it's on the agenda.
Okay, well, whereas notices of motion while addressing important issues to some councils often do not receive enough time for debate, can often consume large blocks of valuable meeting time, and can become contentious sometimes due to the lack of background, perhaps written reports and information, and other information. Therefore, it be resolved that council procedure bylaw be amended to require that notices of motions that are not necessarily time sensitive be submitted for consideration at a council priorities meeting prior to being presented to council at a regular meeting for debate.
Just before you actually move that, and I look for a seconder, we are going to be meeting again regarding the council procedure bylaw. Would you want to refer this to that discussion?
Sure.
Okay, and then that way, Ms. Bauer, that is coming up in a future CPC, so we could defer this to the discussion. We can have a more fulsome
Don't
discussion.
even need a seconder then. That could actually, something can happen without.
You could just put it into the motion to refer. Okay, so is there a seconder? Councillor Kunst? Okay, so.
I'm going to refer it.
To refer this to the CPC session on our procedural bylaw, because we have, I think there's other amendments that folks want to add to that session. So if that works for you, because we have to take it there anyway. Councillor Richter?
I'm opposed to the referral. I don't see the pertinence of this particular notice of motion other than to complicate matters even more than they already are complicated, and besides which CPC is backlogged enough as it is, so I'm not supporting the referral.
Thank you. Councillor Woodard?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking, we got half an hour. We could have disposed of this rather than sending it for discussion at a committee that is relatively backlogged and time constrained. I guess there's really we're debating the referral at this point. There's really no point getting into the motion itself, but in terms of some of the complicated aspects to it. So yeah, I don't see the need to refer it. I think we could easily deal with it now with half an hour remaining.
Well, the point that I'm referring to is that we are already discussing our procedural bylaw at that session, and I know that at least Councillor Richter has a list of items that she wants to add to it. So I felt this would be appropriate in the discussion of our procedural bylaw. Not that there isn't enough time now, but certainly we already are looking at procedural bylaw. We have a session put aside for that, so that's why I asked to have it referred. Councillor Davis.
Okay, so the actual motion now, to notice, where's the notice of motions? This is a notice of motion, and it is important. And now it's going to be referred to the, so it's kind of like perfect because it's going. Okay, I'll focus. I'm just wondering, there are notice of motions that come in and if we take them and massage them and slide them somewhere, I'm just wondering if that's a good thing, some of them, but I don't think we should do that with all of them. So I'm really, I don't know if this should go to a, because it's like now we're just stamping it and off it goes. We should maybe, I don't know if there's a lot of background to this. I think it's fairly simple. There's no written report, other than if it does go to that procedural bylaw, that kind of fits in with what we're doing there. It really does, doesn't it? But I don't want to then take it there because let's deal with it. We're here and we should be dealing with it. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of got to ponder this if anybody else wants to.
I think it'll end up there anyway because prior to amending the procedural bylaw, these amendments all have to come back to council for readings. So it's going to end up back on our desk anyway. This is just, the procedural bylaw has to be amended anyway. So there's a time and place that we're actually looking at further amendments to the procedural bylaw. That's why I thought this would be a good place for it to go, because it has to come back to us anyway. Councillor Long.
Well, I didn't get a chance to actually explain where I was coming from because we popped in this thing, so I could spend a minute or so on that. I found it, how to work it now, yeah. But let me just be clear where we are. So I guess the motion's been made and seconded and referred. I mean, at the council policy revision meeting, I could bring up this point right there and then, as we'll all be bringing up points, right, on how we do things, how we can do things better. And so maybe this is just the heads up for that, and I guess that's what the referral is doing. It's saying, well, we're not going to decide this tonight, but we're going to talk about it at the council policy revision meeting or whatever, and discuss the merits of it perhaps then. But I mean, really, what I'm trying to say is that motions deserve appropriate attention, and I don't know. I think actually the last one's a good example. It's a great motion, but we could be here for hours and hours debating it because they can be very, very complicated. And I think our citizens deserve better than that because we have a duty, our number one duty is to deal with bylaws, I think.
Okay, well, we do have time.
Well, you want to call me out of order?
No, okay, excuse me. So just stick to the referral, and then we'll, Councillor Long, I know you already just worded it.
All right.
To the referral.
All right. I guess maybe I should have made this discussion before the referral was made, but
I didn't think
let's support the referral and find another time to talk about it. I guess, it's up to you folks. Yeah. It really is up to council what it would like to do. And if you think it's all working very well right now, then I'll say, hey, that's wonderful. But I don't think it is. In fact, the last meeting, and I think this is a reason that the referral is required, Your Worship, the last meeting, you didn't start the public hearing until 11 p.m. at night. And it was extended till 12:30 in the morning, 12:30 a.m., because there was a lot of time dedicated to notices of motion. And I wonder if that's really good decision-making, to be having a notice of motion that was stated earlier. It's only 3 days. So referring this to a meeting where we can discuss it in full, I think is a good idea. So I'll certainly support that.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I just want to weigh in on the referral. I don't think it's going to be that helpful because I won't be supporting this in any event. It's completely illogical to me that we are looking at this. We already have the ability to look at all of the motions case-by-case basis. If we see something and it looks like it's very complicated and we don't have enough time, we can always say, let's put it forward to a CPC meeting. So I think this is unnecessarily cumbersome as a blanket approach to this referral process. And as a person, personally, I'm not taking this personally, and so I hope you don't see it this way, but I think that the business of the Township of Langley, part of the policy business, is driven by notices of motion, and therefore, I don't think it's a good idea from a public policy point of view to defer them unnecessarily. I'm not saying some shouldn't be deferred, but I think to do it on a blanket approach is not the correct procedure.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you.
On the referral.
Is my mic on? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Just like the last motion, we had a discussion, and I let Councillor Woodward know, and the council, of course, was speaking to all the my position on some of these things. The notice of motion came up. I read it. I discussed it with staff, discussed it with other council members, and we just debated it or discussed at the table. We came up with some form of resolution that we can continue to work towards. They're working living document, so we can work with staff, we can work with other members of council, and we let everyone know our position on something, and we'll continue to let her know. That, I believe, although it was a difficult motion, but I think it was resolved, and I think we'll continue to resolve, because we do have concerns that we want to dwell and work with our public. And Councillor Long, I guess this motion, and we're already doing it already. We're already referring things back to staff. We're already. I know I should be speaking of the referral. I know I should be, and so I can't support referral, nor can I support the motion. So it's unfortunate, because I think we're already doing those things. And if we have a challenge, we refer it or we defeat it. Thank you,
Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I was going to speak to the referral. I really didn't get a chance to talk about the motion itself before we send it off there to discuss it yet again. Yeah, it's just in specific to modifying the council procedure bylaw. I think we can decide right now. We've got, and again, another 20 minutes. You can decide right now whether this is a good idea, and if it's not, then we don't have to discuss it again at CPC. Staff don't have to put it on the agenda. We don't have to consider it further. I also don't see any other mechanism to get items on the agenda besides notices of motion. So I don't support the referral, because I don't support the idea of restricting our ability to put change on the agenda. And notices of motions are not causing longer meetings. We don't meet enough. That's what's causing longer meetings.
We talk too much. That's what's causing longer meetings.
Maybe that's your opinion.
It is my opinion, and with 7.5 years of experience, it is certainly my opinion. Okay, J3, I'm going to call the question on J3.
Do I get another chance?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know you didn't push your button. It's just a referral. I mean, either we're going to go for it or we're not. It comes along.
So, I mean, I hope we can refer it and discuss it later, because I didn't have a chance to talk really about the rationale behind it. But I'll just have to say that governing by notice of motion is not the way to govern a municipality. We have a duty here to pass bylaws for people that own property. So if
on referral. Yeah,
if we don't discuss it later on, we're just not going to be able to help make things better.
I think the referral vote will tell the tale on how council feels. J3.
Oh, sorry. Are we voting?
Yes, we're voting on the referral. And the referral fails on a tie vote. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Richter, Councillor Woodward, Councillor Arneson opposed. J4, Mr. Backen.
Your Worship, that was the referral. You still have the notice of motion itself to dispose of?
Well, we referred the motion to.
It was defeated.
It failed. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Councillor Woodward, on the main motion.
My first or second on the main motion? I think it's my first on the main motion. So, yeah, I mean, I think we can dispose of this. I didn't quite understand the issue here. First of all, it says here, amended to require notices of motion that are not time sensitive. Well, I thought about that, and I thought every single one of my notice of motions is time sensitive, so that automatically qualifies to get placed on the agenda. Most of the notices of motion either go to staff or CPC anyway. So again, I don't see the need that we're going to now put it to a committee that meets once a month for an hour or two. The governance by notice of motion, I think we've been hearing about this a long time by people that have been on council a long time and resist change. A lot of the notices of motion have been based upon priorities that we worked out at the council workshop, at least from me. I think 1 or 2 or 3 last year were not. So for me, I view that as a way to progress forward with the council priorities, which is the only mechanism available to me. I can't form a task force, so the only thing I can do is place a notice of motion on the agenda and start working it through the system like we have on a couple of other items. And so for me, I view this as an attempt to take away our only mechanism to move forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kunst.
So the reason I like this notice of motion is because as a new councillor, I have found it incredibly difficult to actually plow through some of the notices of motion, especially when they have huge ramifications for our community. Sometimes I'll get an email or something in that the public isn't even aware of, some of this, and they don't have time to even address the notice of motion. So in that way, I was thinking that it would give the public an opportunity to actually have some say about maybe what, a notice of motion and how that's going to affect them. And so anyway, that's why I would actually support this notice of motion.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I had a question on a point of order, I guess. Was the original motion moved and seconded? I for some reason thought that the original motion was the referral.
It was the referred, moved and seconded to refer this, and that failed, so we're back.
Okay, but was this motion moved and seconded?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I believe Ms. Bauer?
I don't think it was seconded.
So the motion included the referral. You're right.
So, Your Worship, the motion, we're unclear. The motion
the original motion was just to take this and refer it to CPC so we could have a fulsome discussion, which obviously we're having now. So,
Your Worship, there's two parts to it. Was the original motion to move the motion and refer it, or was it to refer it before it was moved? Because if that's not the case, we should go back and we should actually have a mover and seconder for the motion, even though I suspect it's not going to be successful.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Is there a mover and seconder of the motion? Councillor Long, seconder? Councillor Kunst. Okay. Councillor Richter.
Then I'm going to just state for the record, I will not be supporting this. I consider this particular notice of motion to be punitive and muzzling to the public's business. It restricts individual councillors from bringing forward new business as it comes up within the course of their daily jobs. So I can't support this, and I won't.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Yeah, well, that is certainly not the intent by any means. What I was trying to do here with this motion is to give the notice of motion due consideration. The package arrives at 4 o'clock on a Thursday. That's if you work from as soon as it arrives until maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night, and say you devote your Friday and your Saturday and your Sunday for another 10 hours here and another 10 hours there, perhaps 4 on Monday, because don't forget we have to be here at noon. It seems like about 30 hours, and that's 1,800 minutes. So you had a package of 700 pages. That gives you about 2 minutes per page to look at your council package. But wait a second. Now we're going to add a notice of motion. Well, the notice of motion that came up this meeting, I spent 2 or 3 hours on, and I still don't understand them. I'm sorry to say. But so then if you take 3 notices of motion, that's 360 minutes right there. If you take 2 hours on each one, that brings it down to less than 2 minutes per page that you're going to study for your actual package. So I just don't think that it's fair, really, in the business that we're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis, approving bylaws, discussing bylaws. Certainly notices of motions are important to many councillors, so they should have the proper time devoted to discuss them. So the idea of this motion is that it would have its own forum to discuss this initiative put forward by councillors, flush it out, talk about it, and then recommend it, then the motion can still come to council, but a lot of the background is done instead of what we do now and what we've done for 20 years, that's how long I've sat here, is poke these notices of motion at the end of every meeting. So there's fatigue getting in. Councillor Woodward saying, hey, we still got half an hour. We used to meet until 6 o'clock. Then we changed it till 6:15 because we couldn't get the business done, and now apparently we're at 6:30, which allows a good half an hour between this meeting and the next meeting, and that's just not enough time in my mind, but that's what we do. But it never used to be that way. It used to be that we had a bit more time to unwind and to consult with each other, maybe even have a discussion or two over dinner so that we can get through the agenda properly. So if we don't do something with notices of motion, I think it's just unfair to the proponents, that's people that own land in our township. It's unfair to staff. It's unfair to us as councillors because I don't think we're making the best decision we can in that type of environment where it's so rushed. And it's very unfair to the motion itself because it doesn't get proper time to be deliberated on properly. So I think that my idea was that this procedure, which could be discussed at any point with other suggestions, would go towards improving our governing process.
Councillor Ferguson.
Well, I mean, I think Councillor Long pointed out some things procedurally that we need to do regardless of notice of motion. Maybe if we, instead of meeting at 1:30 today, maybe we should have met at 12:30 or 1. I mean, maybe there's other opportunities. We know we need the time, and we do need the time. we need to allocate that time, extra time, to be able to do things and to be able to spread out our agenda. And that'd be another thing. And also procedurally, if there's an opportunity for staff to get our package sooner, if we're meeting every 2 or 3 weeks, or there's a break or a long weekend or something, and maybe that information or staff information, maybe not even all the agenda, but main parts of the agenda that coming forward that we can be prepared for. Those are other things that got nothing to do with a notice of motion. And notice of motions can still bog down at a council priorities commission meeting. I mean, that can happen too. So you would have you would be somewhere along the line following that term that I don't like to use, is the governing by notice of motion at CPC meetings. So where do you draw the line? Where do you work out these little dysfunctionalities? I don't think this motion does that. I think the discussion has been good. Here we had another good discussion on a notice of motion. So, but I won't be supporting this.
Councilor Woodward?
Yeah, no, sorry. I don't view, I hear Councillor Ong saying that he wants to be helpful in ensuring the motions are reviewed and we all have time to look at them. I still am back to the main point, which is that that's what's occurring for almost all of these motions anyway. They're working their way through the process. Staff have plenty of time. You have plenty of time to review and think about them and come back to them later. But to now say they have to go to a committee meeting that meets once a month for an hour or two is not a sufficient process to move forward with the people's business. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll call the question on J3. And it fails. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Richter, Councillor Woodward, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Davis opposed. And we move to J4. Mr. Backen.
Your Worship, this returns because last meeting we were very tight for time, so we advised council but wanted to make sure there was some time to digest it. This is in reference to the September 30th meeting. This is when we effectively were to kick off our budget session by actually establishing the priorities for the upcoming year, or starting that process. I wouldn't say we established them then. However, to do so means on the 30th, that is September the 30th, we'd have to start at something like 8:30 in the morning to proceed to 2:30 before we have a regular full day of meetings. So that'd be a very, very long day. Council may wish to provide us some direction in this regard, and it may have to be on a different day, but we're not certain of of council members' other obligations. So we're very limited with Mr. McIntosh's availability, but he has been the one that's been dealing with this before.
What recommendations do you have on alternative dates where we can spend time on it without having to worry about a council meeting coming up?
We feel if this was not acceptable, we could go back to Mr. McIntosh with additional authority to indicate we have to find some more dates, because this was one of the few dates he gave us that was on a Monday, but there may be other dates we could go towards if it wasn't going to be on a Monday.
Okay, that would be my feeling, because it would be a very long day, 8:30 till 10:30. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, I like that suggestion, Mr. Mayor, and I would support that we perhaps look at another, either we find another day or we find another consultant. And this says council workshop budget discussion. So the question that I had was, is he leading us through looking at the budgeting process? In which case, we don't really need him to do that. We could get a different consultant. But if it is to reestablish our priorities, then we probably should stick with him. But yeah, I'm fully in support of your suggestion.
Mr. Backen, did you have something to add to that?
Just it would be the day, Your Worship, the backing up to the comment. This is really for the priorities that then feed into the budget. We do a lot of work before them, but this helps set us our capital projects, some of which are already established. The other comment, though, was in terms of, is there a day of the week that does or does not work for council? Because I think if we went back to him saying that day is not appropriate, but generally Tuesdays or Thursdays or Wednesdays, that would help us.
A Monday opposite council.
Yeah, all other Mondays he was booked for, so we're trying to expand beyond that.
Mr. Mayor, if I could make a suggestion, we have nothing in August. Why don't we see if we can get an August day for him?
I won't be here. So.
You're gone for the whole month? Oh, okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, well, that's a little difficult. But
yeah, okay.
Tuesdays, Thursdays don't work for me. Yeah. September, October.
So Wednesdays, Fridays, or Saturdays?
Yeah.
Fridays depends on the metro, if it's a metro day or not.
We can look at the
So Wednesdays schedules. Or Saturdays?
Yeah. Fridays, some Fridays.
Some Fridays.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Arneson, any thoughts on this?
you probably don't really want to hear them in their unvarnished form. I just want to say that I appreciate an opportunity to revisit this, because I just did the math, and I just thought 14 hours of sitting listening to council business is just too much. I don't think we can make good decisions that way, and so I think we need to put our thinking caps on, find a different day, because I think our budget is really important. Because not only that, we're looking at all our council materials, so we're already burdened with that, and to have the other one on the same day, I think it's just totally unreasonable. So I hope we can do a doodle poll or something and find a day that we can all come that does not coincide, with a council day.
Thank you. Councilor Woodward?
Yeah, is there a possibility of someone else besides Mr. McIntosh that would free up the scheduling?
No, that's always a possibility. It just means that we have to re-educate them as to the previous steps we've taken in regards to it, and there'll be a different process the council will be familiar with. So generally, that just takes longer.
And I'm gathering from most people, most of my colleagues on council, that we're accepting the premise that this is a valuable, useful process. There's no sense in really challenging that assumption. I mean, I'm beginning to question that. So, but I think it sounds like we've already agreed that this is going ahead.
It'll be up to council if they wish to give direction. Otherwise, I've found that this is helpful. We got a great list of priorities. Hopefully, we can stick with it through the term. We have 6 on the last priorities chart, and it helps focus council. I think he's been helpful. I know other municipalities have used him and other consultants to do similar work, and it helps to focus council and staff on what the priorities of council are. So, whether you get him or somebody else, it all ends up to be the same. So. Mr. Backen, do you have any comments on that?
That's a good summary, Your Worship. We've tried a number of processes over the years, and I think it was referenced that around 2014 or 2015 we started this. The challenge before was when we didn't have some sort of priority session. A lot of it was subjective in terms of trying to determine council's priorities in terms of what we presented. So any mechanism that gets council to actually discuss and debate the priorities helps us narrow the field somewhat. So whether it's this process or something else is fine by us. We're simply using this one because it's the most expeditious, so we can find a day that works. We can try to accelerate things because we know we can probably do it in a day or 3/4 of a day. The suggestion about the efficiency may relate to different topics on council that council may wish to consider now or in a different form.
Yeah, so just, again, and I won't belabor this too much, but if we can just go along with it for now. I won't suggest a motion or change the direction, but maybe we can look at that as part of the discussion on the day, whether or not this process is valuable, because I think we haven't really done that. And I think what I remember from the council workshop sessions, they were over 3 months, 2.5 days for what I think could have been done in about 2 hours. So I think that's part of my frustration. Then, of course, other frustrations related to it that aren't really relevant to today, right now. But I think that in that case, maybe there is some way to try to find something more efficient than this typical workshop process where ideas are everywhere and then they're collated. It just takes forever to get down to 5 items, so it could take an hour, in my opinion. Thanks.
Councilor Davis.
Actually, if you're looking for direction from me, I think another day. Like, I can come anytime, just Mondays. I like to sleep until about 12 or 1 and then get up and I just wonder if I get my legs get fat and I have to stand up and it's a long day for me. That's okay. I can do that. But I'm just wondering, like, I would much rather have it another day. And I'm not going to say whether or not we get another consultant, because I actually kind of rather like the organization you bring. So put me on any time, any day. I'm generally pretty good that way, other than if it has to be, it's just a long day.
So, Your Worship, I think what we're hearing is non-council Mondays. We'll just verify that. We've tried that before, but more importantly, Wednesdays, non-metro Fridays, and Saturdays. Yep. That opens it up.
That works.
Okay. Thank you.
I think you got traction. Okay. Motion to terminate? No. Oh, sorry. Other business. Councillor Long.
Thank you. In the distribution package today, item 5, a letter from Mr. Roberts on a crosswalk that we put in on 2/16th, and I was just wondering if staff could look into that, because it appears that it doesn't have a light. You would think on a busy street like that, when you push the crosswalk, the light should turn red and then you can cross. So I guess it isn't. It's just a flashing light saying, hey, someone might be crossing. So can staff look into that? Because I wonder why we wouldn't have put a regular, traffic, not a traffic light, but when you push the button, it turns red.
as a pedestrian controlled traffic light.
Your Worship, we can come back with that. I think what we're talking about is this is a light that when you push it, it flashes caution. It's not a controlled intersection where there's light that stops traffic. That's the distinction. So we can come back and revisit again why that was the process taken, because I believe there's warrants and restrictions in doing.
But I'd like to see that
crosswalks
addressed pretty quickly, because if it's a light that blinks saying be careful, someone might be crossing the street, versus stop, someone is crossing the street, is a big difference on a busy street.
It's still not supposed to step in front of moving cars, though. Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, there was a letter to the editor recently about Sons Memorial Tree revisited in McLeod Park, and just because we just had the Arbor Day, so I was kind of concerned about what is the responsibility of the township in order to make sure these trees stay alive, and I just wanted to maybe ask staff if they're to maybe read the letter or I can send it. And just maybe have a conversation about that. I'm just kind of concerned about future trees and how they get maintained.
Is that the distribution list or in the newspapers? Right?
It's in the newspaper.
Could you then send that along? Then
Sure.
we can track it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I was very disappointed not to see the tree bylaw on today's agendas anywhere. So when is the tree bylaw coming back to us?
Your Worship, staff has been actively working on the direction of council. We are currently targeting the next meeting of council, hopefully, the
Next
27th.
meeting? Okay. I just then, for council's information, I will not be at the next meeting of council because I'm going to be in Ontario at a family wedding. And I would also just like to make it known that if the tree bylaw fails on a defeat vote, I'll be bringing it back for reconsideration. Okay. And the second thing, I've had a number of requests, and I'm not sure if other members of council have, about the length of time that we're in camera, and so people don't know when to tune in to live streaming. So I was wondering if there's any way that we could signal council watchers that we're out of in-camera and back into live stream mode, particularly in the afternoon meetings, perhaps by putting an automatic email list together. If people want to know, they could sign up for this e-list, and we could send out a notice when we adjourn in there saying council will be reconvening in the public in 5 minutes' time, so they've got time to get to their computers.
Maybe Ms. Bauer can put some thought to that, but okay. Any other new business? Call it termination.
Termination.
Councillor Davis, second by Councillor Long. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.